I remember some years ago a radio presenter casually sort of saying that all large mammals within a certain number of years would be extinct if we carry on at the same rate that we're heading. And it did strike me at the time that the news presenter seemed to sort of not acknowledge the fact that he was a large mammal as well. We'd already decided to use the old gift shop, as it were, as the entrance point, so that you didn't enter in the same way. In a way, you go around the gallery sort of backwards. And the first space you enter into, I went right back to a work I'd made in 1995 called Agent Dixon at the Red Star Hotel, which was in a basement of a South London gallery. The idea to walk into storage before you actually see the show seemed like an apt and interesting sort of way to go about it. The work stored in the first space, I Imposter, is a work from Venice in 2011, and the work you pass through it too, The Deliverance and the Patience, is a work from Venice in 2001. I think that sense of being foregrounded in storage, in matter, and that idea of when a work is constructed and becomes sculpture, or at least consciously sculpture, and when a work is taken apart and becomes matter and a pile, but of course no less sculptural in many ways, I think sets the scene for the whole exhibition in many ways. You could say that about the asset strippers upstairs, that from certain angles when you walk around it, it falls down to become the matter it's made from. And then from certain sort of angles it becomes more of a majestic sort of monumental sculpture, passing from one to the other, in which it is most interesting for me, in many ways, that sort of balance. In terms of my own sort of reference back to my own history, this being a survey or a retrospective of sorts, the idea of storage has always been a constant within it, not only for practical reasons, but just out of curiosity. The first show I made for Matt's Gallery in 1996, I think, sort of a trading station, Alpha CMA, was a room of storage of all the detritus collected from the East End of London, within which, in the centre, was a living quarter for what seemed to be a dog with a human mind. From the outset, you just see a room of storage until you get to the centre and you poke your head up into this small space with a television, some bones and a book by the Strugatsky brothers called Hard to Be a God. And then from that point onwards, you read the exhibition backwards, from the inside out, as it were, and understand it as a narrative as opposed to just formality. Well, I think the whole exhibition has been, the work has been recalibrated and organised in such a way to, like matter, like material, and it's been brought back here and re-articulated for the moment in which perhaps we exist, and the works have been chosen specifically for that. The work that had the most effect upon me, in terms of having not seen it for a long time, in this exhibition, was Deliverance and Patience. I haven't seen that for 20 years, it's never been out again. In a way, I wanted it to almost look as if it was built as a raft, or a sort of a barge, or something that could potentially float, and the fact that it may have floated through time and space sort of to this point in time, so it becomes sort of dislocated from its original sort of context, and to give it that sort of sense. But for me, it's worked incredibly well. It's kind of made it into a different work in many ways, but still with that same sort of like a way of articulating itself. Coming kind of on the heels, I suppose, of the asset strippers at the Tate, it was kind of quite an interesting building to be sort of dealing with, because that work was so much about sort of like the post-war Britain that perhaps I'd grown up in and my parents had lived through. A building like the Hayward, which really was my era, it was built 2 years after I was born, is completely a sort of like a symbol of sort of like that positivity, perhaps that hope, that kind of vision put into sort of like architectural form of a post-war New Britain. When I installed it in the Tate in 2009, I remember then when I rebuilt it, standing within it, but within my own old front room, which was a kind of makeshift studio come storeroom, as you can see. In a way, it's probably best to talk about it through the eyes of my youngest daughter. And through her eyes, perhaps I could see the oddness of it, because she wasn't born when it was made. She was quite compelled by it, looking into it, because in a sense she was looking at the essence from which she came, I suppose, in terms of that this existed before she existed, but it's part of her existence. I think looking at her, looking at it, it really was quite affecting. I think the relationship between humanity and the making of artificial intelligence and intelligence beyond ourselves, the loss of categorizations of consciousness like religion and modernity, is putting us in an awkward situation ultimately. And because if we relegate ourselves back to animal by making greater intelligence, and then we are large animal or mammal, sort of like, then we will become extinct ultimately. One hopes that music, film, art are retained, because I think they do have an important part in terms of defining us as something that is beyond that.